Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 470. Ooh, another milestone. For the 22nd of October 2017, Richard Saunders here with you, coming to you this week from the Bay Area, San Francisco. I'm in this neck of the woods to recover from jet lag a little bit, see some family and friends before heading off to Las Vegas in a few days to attend PsyCon. And I'm really looking forward to that. If you're attending PsyCon, please come up and say hello. I'd love to meet as many people as possible. And the exciting news is, with some late revamping and rescheduling, that I'm hosting a panel on Sunday morning of the convention, and I'm thrilled to be in the company of Dr. Rachie, our very own reporter, Dr. Rachel Dunlop, Cara Santamaria from The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and Britt Hermes. And wow, I shall be the odd man out indeed in that company. 3 exceptional women of science, and it will be my honor to moderate a panel with those women. So if you're coming along, that's, it'll be a highlight for me, and I'm sure it'll be a highlight for you too. And if you'd like to ask a question of any of those women, or maybe someone from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, I'll tell you how you can do that at the end of the show. But what's coming up on this week's episode? Another of the continuing series of interviews from Eran Segev on his worldwide tour. This week he talks with Jelena Levin, Pontus Böckman, and András G Pintér from the ESP, the European Skeptics Podcast. And I'm thrilled to say that the ESP recently won an Ockham Award in the UK. And it's good timing because we also have later on in the show an interview with Deborah Hyde, the editor of the British Skeptic magazine. And she's going to be telling us all about the QED and what a great time it was, and the awards, the Ockham Awards in general, what other prizes were given out. Also on this week's show, a follow-up to something we mentioned last week, where the Australian government have handed down a plan via the Health Minister to end subsidies for certain unproven alternative therapies like homeopathy, iridology, and so on. We're going to bring you the story as reported at skeptics.com.au. We also have another contribution from our good friend Professor Paul Willis with a piece of his mind segment. And this week, Paul's going to give us his thoughts and opinions on the way science is funded in Australia. Could we be doing more in Australia to promote and fund science? Well, yes. Yes, we could. And Professor Paul Willis will tell you all about that towards the end of the show. Then to round off the show, another special report from Susan Gerbic on her world trip. This time it's from Sofia in Bulgaria. So, yes, reports from all around the world on the Skeptic Zone. I had an enjoyable flight over the Pacific a few days ago. Oddly enough, the plane was only 1/3 full. Now, there's a tip. If you want to come to the United States from Australia and you leave in October, apparently if you leave on a Thursday, the plane's virtually empty. Most people had a whole 3 seats to themselves, including me. It was rather nice. I stretched out a little bit. Didn't get so much sleep because it's always tough to sleep coming that way around the world from west to east, but I'm not complaining. But now it's time for me to run upstairs, see if there's some clam chowder in the fridge. Famous San Francisco clam chowder. While I'm enjoying that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
Grain of salt, grain of salt, grain of salt.
Let's all take this with a grain of salt. Here's Eran Segev.
Grain of salt now, grain of salt, you gotta take it with a
I've interrupted a board meeting.
Yes.
What kind of board meeting?
Very bored meeting.
Very bored.
Yeah, it is rather bored.
Pun intended.
Of the ESP,
Yes.
the European Skeptics Podcast.
Yeah.
And I have with me...
Feel free to butt in.
András!
Pontus.
Jelena.
And you're supposed to say hello now.
Oh, sorry. Sziasztok!
Hejsan.
Всем привет.
Okay, so now everybody feels at home.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously we're here in Wroclaw for the European Skeptics Congress. And tell me your experiences so far.
It's been fantastic. It's a very controversial first day, I would say, with lots of exorcisms. We've had priests and we have had people not necessarily agreeing with a skeptical point of view. And that's always refreshing and frustrating.
It's not the kind of thing that we usually have in skeptical conferences,
Maybe too little of that, yeah.
Not too
I have a bit of a squared opinion in that because I do think that a skeptics congress is for others to meet up, other skeptics to meet up with one another and exchange experiences and ideas and that kind of stuff, and not for that intellectual exercise kind of thing that we experience today with that guy who was promoting exorcism related ideas, massively religious and biased ideas, and denying the fact that science actually works and it is the way to find out if something is true. And
No, he didn't deny that. He just denied that science can discover anything about God.
Well, and other things. So
yes.
he did not specifically just
didn't limit it to just God.
Yeah, limit it to God. He applied it to a lot of other things as
Absolutely.
well. So he basically denied that science is the way to go. And
So what you're saying basically, it's been a fantastic experience so far.
It's. I mean, meeting all these people is always a fantastic experience, and we joined one another in our disappointment with this guy being present, because it was a terrible experience to go through when we had to look at ourselves. Not necessarily being nice people in terms of our reactions towards
That's right.
him.
I think this is where the
shocking
skepticism
experience.
and the skeptical movement and skeptics lacking. We lack this ability to debate in a nice way rather than picking and making jokes and making fun, which few people in the audience did, and they tried to be clever.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about this. So I only noticed two.
Okay, one or two people, yeah.
Yeah, so generally I think most people, even those who had strong arguments, I thought the arguments were respectful. I mean, there was a little bit of a kind of, giggles in the audience so far, but I think it's very difficult to avoid that completely. But I thought the people who actually spoke to him, I felt, were mostly respectful. I mean, I would have hoped that everybody would be 100% respectful. However, I think that's maybe a little bit too much to ask.
Maybe. I mean, I picked up on those who weren't, maybe, and I maybe concentrated more on those people. And I kept thinking, we need to be better, and we need to be maybe, more articulate. And I don't know if there is a way for us to communicate with those people so that they can go, aha, and they will have this aha moment where they go, well, actually, I don't know, and maybe you're right. And none of these speakers did have that moment. They were all, very much still on their side of the fence. And maybe I'm missing the point, and maybe that's not why they're there. And
for me, I know it's seldom, not enough. I take the time to really listen to people who disagree, because it's so frustrating to hear them and making those logical fallacies and jumping to conclusions and ignoring certain things. So for me, it was a very good exercise to actually force myself to listen through all of that, because I think we should do that sometimes. But then you can say, well, what's the point of having this debate? We were never going to persuade this guy, and there was nobody else listening, because normally I would say it's worth having that conversation with somebody who's really a true believer, because you're not talking only to him, you're talking to the others who are listening, who may be on the fence. But here was nobody on the fence.
But you say we were never going to persuade this guy, but I secretly hoped we could make a difference and make that crack in his thinking where he'd gone, okay, now I see what you're saying. But at no point did we maybe pose a question that was good enough or something. You know what I mean? Yeah. And maybe that's a wishful thinking, like I said.
No, but it is very hard.
I want to change the
topic.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's the three of you here, and I want to talk about the European Skeptics Podcast.
So that's what we talk about.
You are very, very close to your 100th episode, aren't you?
9 episodes away.
Yeah. So that's quite an achievement.
That's true.
Yeah. I'm surprised myself.
Very good at producing and editing and all that. He's not very good at counting.
We all specialize in different areas.
Yeah.
That's why we complement
Counting
each
has
other.
never been my forte. No.
That's mine and
Okay, so I want you to tell me a little bit. It's a while. It's about 2 years. It's you've been working on it. You've been changing. You've been although you haven't changed much, but you've been improving it. You've developed. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about the past? How do you feel about the future?
I think what we've proved so far, that with the modifications we've done over the years, we've proved that the initial idea was good. I mean, we do have a message, we do have a format that works, and then we've improved it a little bit. What I personally think is our biggest achievement is all the interviews we've had. I mean, we've interviewed like 50 people or something,
I think
almost.
So, yeah, more than that.
And
more than that.
That's been very, very stimulating, at least for me. I don't know how the listeners feel, but for me, it's been a fantastic journey.
Well, for me, I loved every episode, and of course, from my selfish point of view, I'll go a little bit, from the same point of view as Pontus did. Every time we do an episode, I learn so much, whether it's an interview or whether we're discussing news, because I have to make myself to go out and do a research and then present it, and I learn constantly all the time. So that's my personal selfish perspective, and I'm also hoping that with us, our listeners learn as well, not just from the interviews, but from other things that's happening in Europe.
I'm really proud of what we've achieved so far. We could have achieved more, of course, in terms of a larger listener base or whatever, but we limited ourselves to the skeptic community. But the feedback that we've got so far is amazing. We love all that. And, we already had a couple of people approaching us, telling us that the reason why they're here at the conference, the European Skeptics Congress, is because they heard of it on the European Skeptics Podcast, which makes us realize that it's worth doing it. And just recently, I don't know if you've heard that we've been nominated for. By many people for the Ockham Awards
again,
and that means that we are finalists for the Ockham Awards. So we are really looking forward to being at QED, not only for this reason, of course. Because it's a lot of fun. And I'm very happy that I'm going to get to see these guys again in person, because it rarely happens. But even if we don't win this year, having been nominated twice, that's something that we are very proud of.
Absolutely.
And we'd like to thank our listeners for that.
You've only been around for 2 years. There's podcasts that have been around for much longer.
It's a big privilege. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, what next for you as a podcast?
Now that was the board meeting that you.
That should have been a video podcast, because the look on your faces, all three of you were looking and saying, "Future."
Pontus is right that we don't look too far ahead.
Okay.
So what we would like to do now is to find the way to produce the next episode, because we are all here and we're not sitting at home in front of our laptops.
And you're about to go on a bit of a trip with Susan and
afterwards.
Mark.
Susan, Mark, and Liubomir Baburov from Bulgaria, from Sofia. And looking forward to that, and that keeps developing as well. So we keep adding new stops and new events as I was going along, and even our crowdfunding has been very, very successful so far, thanks to some people who donated even large sums of money. I cannot thank them enough for that. But so we are hoping to get the board meeting going and successful in terms of coming up with something for the next episode. But in the long run,
I think we'll just keep going.
We'll just keep going, and we still have a lot. We have a list of people we would like to interview, because there's so much going on in Europe, and we would like to cover all that. And there might be a possibility for us to collaborate a bit more closely with the European Council of Skeptical Organizations, EXO. There's going to be a board meeting this Sunday, and we are hoping to see some changes for the future. And who knows? That might be an opportunity for us to play a larger part in the European movement.
Yeah, so that was actually going to be my next question about how do you see yourselves, and that is something I would probably want to ask you individually as well as a group. How do you see yourself in terms of your position and your role in the skeptical movement in Europe, or in the skeptical movement in the world, I suppose?
Oh, that's a very broad and
deep question.
Come on, it's all a bit.
Come on,
got a bit serious. I don't know. I feel like we're doing our little part in the skeptical movement, and I hope that in the future we will collaborate. Me personally, I'm sure the guys will join me. Collaborate more with European skeptic organizations, because they're so scattered and they're so kind of not connected, and sometimes it feels like herding cats sometimes when you try to maybe pass the knowledge to each other or experiences. And I hope we'll learn to be better, and I'll hope we'll help people to be better in collaborating as well. And I know it's a big task to take on, but I think that's how the whole idea of the podcast started in the first place. I know there's a bit of a problem in the language terms, because we obviously do our podcast in English, and only those people who understand English can listen to it. But still, that's how I see our input, or my input, and I'll keep doing this thing with the guys and recording podcasts.
Yeah. No, I absolutely see us as part of a grassroots movement, really. We're trying to get the network of European skeptics to work better, to get an awareness among other people, among skeptics, that there are things happening all over the place, that there are skeptical groups in almost every city has something. And that's why we have the calendar on the webpage, where we put in all the skeptics in the pub things that we can find. And, typically that's like 15 to sometimes 20 events every week, all year round. And I don't think anybody knew that before we started to pull that together.
I would like to emphasize that we are trying to be a bit of a communicational hub for the European Skeptics movement. So we'd like to be the meeting place for all these different organizations, or at least help out with providing such a meeting place. And if we can do that, we're going to be more than happy, and we're going to try our best to be useful.
Yeah. And have fun. It's fun. It is.
We're having a lot of fun.
Yes.
And it's just now we're getting to the point that even editing the show is not only a huge amount of work, but also a lot of fun, because we get to.
I used to be shouted a lot because my voice apparently was very hard to edit.
My favorite part of editing the show, I'm pretty sure when Pontus does it, he has a similar feeling, that adding the outtakes at the end, the small bloopers, that is the funniest moment ever.
Yeah. Sorry, I just have to ask something. Richard may edit this out. I just have to ask. Have people been complaining about your voice?
No, András finds that sometimes when I speak, I do a lot of
Well, it's all edited out in the end, so you don't hear
But then when he edits it, it's like, oh my god, you use so many like certain things, or like not parasite words, but like sounds, and you become really aware of how you talk.
No, the reason I asked, it's a good reason why I asked you this, because it turns out that female podcasters get lots of complaints about their voice, which I find astonishing, but it's a thing. I mean, look, we know in general in society, we know that when women are much more likely to be called shrill, or just or loud, or it's okay. We know that.
Squeaky voice.
But specifically with female podcasters, apparently there's a lot more complaints about female podcasters about the voice. I know from the SGU, for example, that when Rebecca was around, they received lots of complaints about Rebecca's voice, and now they receive complaints about Kara's voice.
Really?
Yes. And she has a lot.
I love her voice.
Yes, come on.
Anyway, look, clearly it's not something that's rational or me, but it's
nobody.
It does happen.
No,
and it's terrible that it happens, which is why I kind of opened my mouth when you said it, because I thought that's what you meant. Anyway. Jelena, Pontus, and András, it's always lovely to be with you, and I look forward to, first of all, obviously, spend more time with you over the next couple of days, but also see you in future events.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
We're looking forward
Thanks
to your
very
talk.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Grain of salt now. Grain of salt, you gotta take it with a...
You told me that aliens really exist. You met them and swooned.
Sziasztok!
Всем привет.
Hejsan allihop!
Guys, I just had the most amazing experience.
What experience, András?
András, have you been to the pub? I told you not to hang out with Mash. You know he was blessed by Peter Popov.
No, Jelena, I'm not talking about psychics. It was a real ESP experience.
You have been to the pub. Either that or you've been smoking something.
No, Pontus, the ESP is the European Skeptics Podcast. It's the most amazing thing. You get to know so much about skeptics and their activities across Europe. You know, events, hot topics, and interviews with lots of interesting people.
Oh wow, cool. By the way, Pontus, you just committed the false dichotomy fallacy.
I guess that means I'm really wrong.
Yep. And you can even learn about those fallacies on the show and hear about people spreading silly ideas. You should really check it out. It's the ESP, the European Skeptics Podcast. It's on every week.
All right, so where can I get this ESP experience? It sounds good.
You can go online at the ESP.eu, follow it on Twitter at ESPodcast_EU, or like the podcast on Facebook. Oh, and you can also contact the show by sending them an email to info@theesp.eu. And if you want to subscribe, do a quick search for the European Skeptic Podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, or Stitcher.
I don't know how you can believe.
Now, last week we alluded to a very new story, sort of a breaking story last week about the government withdrawing support for various alternative therapies via eliminating subsidies for private health insurance. Well, the update to this story comes to us from the website of Australian Skeptics, skeptics.com.au. And if you want to keep up with skeptical things in Australia, that's the website to go to, published on the 17th of October by Tim Mendham. Quote, illegal, end quote, for health funds to support some natural therapies. As part of its overhaul of private health insurance, the federal government has decided to remove the insurance subsidy from a range of natural therapies. A statement from the Department of Health says that consumers can still choose to access these services, but they will not be able to claim benefits from their insurer. In fact, it will be illegal for health funds to include the therapies in their coverage, which is generally found in the extras package. However, a spokesman for the department told Australian skeptics that funds might end up offering vouchers for such therapies, but they cannot include them in health insurance coverage packages. The therapies involved are Alexander technique, aromatherapy, Bowen therapy, Buteyko, which is a breathing therapy, Feldenkrais, herbalism, homeopathy, iridology, kinesiology, which is applied kinesiology in this case, naturopathy, Pilates, reflexology, Rolfing, shiatsu, tai chi, and yoga. Now, as an aside, Rolfing is something to do with the Earth's magnetic field. There was some confusion over the fact that Reiki, the energy removal service, was not included in the list, particularly as Health Minister Gary Hunt had mentioned it in the press interviews. However, the spokesman said that was probably due to an oversight, and Reiki should have been included. Chiropractic and acupuncture are not listed among the binded therapies. The change will take effect from the 1st of April 2019, and while the government says, quote, it will contribute to reducing private health insurance premium price increases, end quote, the amount actually paid out in health benefits for these alt-med therapies is only a small component of the billions of funds issued as benefits. According to a review undertaken some years ago by Australian skeptics, the amount paid by health insurance funds in benefits in 2010-2011 amounted to $12.4 billion, with the subsidy, the PHI rebate package, valued at around $4.7 billion. This included taxation revenue foregone through exemption of the Medicare levy surcharge, funding the 30% rebate itself, and several $100 million in extra Medicare payments for medical and pharmaceutical services associated with higher private hospital use. Most of the health fund's benefits, and thus indirectly the subsidy, went to hospital and general medical treatments. The, quote, contribution, end quote, that this change will make to the, quote, reducing premium price increases, end quote, may not be that exciting. The government undertook a review of the rebate on natural therapies for private health insurance in 2015, which found that, overall, there was a paucity of rebate evidence identified for natural therapies studied. The findings were not acted upon at the time. However, the Australian Labor Party included dropping the subsidies to natural therapies as part of its policy platform at the last federal election. Despite some false steps along the way, the government has now decided to bite the bullet and follow suit. Again, you can see this story and much more at skeptics.com.au.
Hallo aan alle Nederlandse luisteraars. Op dit moment bent u aan het luisteren naar de Skeptic Zone, voor wetenschap en kritisch nadenken. Voor meer informatie ga naar www.skepticzone.tv.
Joining me now all the way from London, haven't been to London for a few years, it's the editor of the UK Skeptic magazine, Deborah Hyde. Hello, Deborah.
Hello.
It's so lovely to catch up with you. I haven't seen you for quite a few years. In fact, 2014, the last time I did QED, and we had a wonderful chat over a cup of tea, and I remember you gave some excellent talks revolving witchcraft, or where was it, werewolves, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, I think it was that year that I did either werewolves or vampires. I can't remember which.
I think it might have been werewolves. That rings a bell. What a great talk that was. That was really fascinating. It was so interesting. But I think.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, I really did. But I think that is an indication of the flavour of QED itself. QED is just over. We've had some nice reports from Eran Segev over the past little while. Some of those from QED. How was it from your point of view?
I love QED. I think it's fantastic. There are several elements to it that make it so wonderful. The first is that it is superbly well organised. There's nothing clunky or wrong with it. And that is quite a feat for people who have full-time jobs and that this is their part-time free second string. So for something to be so competently organised is stunning. The second thing is that there are several strands to it. So, you know, you haven't just got one lecture going on. There are panels going on. There's now, from this year, there's a workshop track going on to help people who are running their own events. There's a video track, a podcast track. So you have lots and lots to choose from. And the social stuff's fantastic, you know. It's just a load of people who get on in a hotel together for a weekend, which is really superb. I think it's the other thing actually is I think that QED bring in an awful lot of I suppose, oblique subjects. You know, very traditionally, if you were talking about skepticism, you'd have a ghost hunter, a homeopath campaigner, and somebody who's failed to find Bigfoot for 20 years. Whereas, really, what they do is they bring in people who they bring in straight science communicators. So the last lecture was about how we can perceive the universe through means other than our senses. We're talking about gravitational waves,
right,
and using radio telescopes and things. So, you know, we've got some pretty straightforward physics there, but also just other subjects and how they relate to evidence-based thinking and critical thinking. There was Carol Tavris, who I'm a great fan of. She's a social psychologist, and she was just talking about changing people's minds and how people become so very attached to their prejudices in the first place, and about how one of the finest things you can do when given the evidence is say, I was wrong, I've changed my mind. So it's sort of, you know, they don't hit the nail so squarely on the head. They're coming at these things from oblique angles with their choices of guests, and I absolutely love that.
Yes, I mean, you're just reminding me, whetting my appetite. Maybe I can make it there next year, I don't know. But I was lucky enough to be there 2 years running, and for 2 years I gave talks, which was a fantastic opportunity for me. And it's quite interesting giving a presentation to a British audience as compared to an American audience. They're both wonderful, but they're both different. And I think in some respects, I think I can tune in, or they can tune into my sense of humour a bit better in the UK than America.
Yeah, perhaps. I think Australians and Brits do have a very similar sense of humour, and that sort of brings me back to sometimes some of the most pleasant experiences are in the bar after all the sessions in the evenings. We do all get together and have a good laugh.
It is. So, well, I can't speak highly enough of QED, folks. It's going to be on again next year, undoubtedly. And in the lead up to that, we'll be letting you know. It's something to look forward to. But for now, let's keep concentrating on the recent event where I noticed you gave out the annual Ockham Awards for the excellence in skeptical activism.
Yes.
Now, and that's a highlight of every QED, isn't it?
Oh, I certainly hope so. Yes. We do. They have a gala dinner, and you can pay to go into the gala dinner, but if you don't want to, then you can go and eat elsewhere. I frequently do. But after that, it's open to everyone. They have an evening's entertainment with some really good comedians and performers, and that opens up with the Ockham ceremony every year.
Yes, I remember it well from the times I was there. So let's cast an eye. We'll cast an eye over the winners for this year. And what we'll do is we'll cover the outstanding awards, and then we'll get to what you've dubbed the Rusty Razor, which is the equivalent to our bent spoon. So we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah.
It's a great name. I love, and there's a picture. I'm looking at the website now of a disposable, old-fashioned razor blade that looks quite rusty. Let's have a look at some of the winners this year.
Yes, nothing you'd actually really want to use to shave anything.
No. Yeah, I think you're right. Shortlisted for...
Well, not unless you'd had your tetanus beforehand, anyway.
I can only agree, having a look at this razor. So we have a couple of categories. We have a number of categories here. We have blogs. So there was some shortlisting for the blogs. And can you tell me who the eventual winner for blogging was?
The eventual winner this year was Crispian Jago. If you haven't been keeping up with his blog, he's been writing a blog called Always Look on the Bright Side of Death. Now, Crispian will be familiar to our readers as a satirist and a humorist. He's very funny, and he's contributed a lot of our centerfold posters over the years. He was diagnosed with kidney cancer a couple of years ago. He had radical surgery, and we all hoped very much that it had gone away forever. But it turns out that it hasn't, and he's received a diagnosis, a final diagnosis. He isn't going to make it. So anybody else would feel sorry for themselves and kind of disappear and retire in misery. Instead, Crispian has started to write an absolutely inspirational blog about how atheists and people with an evidence-based and reason-based approach to life face death. And it's incredibly it's incredibly affirming. I mean, it's as funny as you would expect from Crispian, but to follow him through this journey is, and he's a good writer as well. I mean, it's not like we're just sort of seeing content. So I think all of the judges were incredibly moved by that. There's always very, very stiff competition, and it is always an incredibly hard job. I mean, I write to all of the shortlisters afterwards and say, I do hope that you realise what a credit it was just to get to the shortlist, because it's hard to choose the winners from such a good list of categories. And in this case, we really, really felt that Crispian's blog was incredibly positive for people who take an evidence-based approach to life, going through a very, very difficult situation.
You're absolutely right. Now, folks, what I'll do is I'll link to the page about the Ockhams in this week's show notes, so you can cast an eye over the other shortlisted podcasts and events and so on. But speaking about the other areas, let's move to events. And I noticed that this year the Edinburgh Skeptics scored an Ockham.
They did. Yes, they did. They run every year. They run an event called Skeptics on the Fringe, and you may know Edinburgh as an extremely cultural city. They have an arts festival every year, and you've got lots of very talented people sort of trying to break their careers, in effect, at this place. I went up there this summer, and it's marvellous. The streets are just thronging with people doing performances, and you can go to lots of little performances for comedy or whatever. Edinburgh Skeptics put on an intense month of programming about science and evidence-based stuff on the Edinburgh Fringe. So one of the things that they managed to do with this, really, is that they're not just talking to the traditional audience. They're managing to really outreach. They're making skepticism just a part of normal culture, and outreaching to people who are just turning up for comedy or dancing or juggling or whatever it is. So it's just such a huge amount of work to have a daily show pretty much over the course of a month. And they've been nominated before, and we were just really impressed with the volume of work that they do. Yes, and
I well remember my time in Edinburgh in 2013, and I was very lucky to give a talk there to skeptics in the pub, and Edinburgh is a city very close to my heart. I think it's a beautiful place, and again, I wish I could go there more often. Now, earlier on in this week's episode of the podcast, The Skeptic Zone, Eran Segev interviewed the winners, in fact, of the podcasting award, which is, of course, the European Skeptics Podcast, the ESP, and what a great podcast that's turned out to be.
It is. It's fantastic. Again, this was a category where it's hard to choose, because the finalists are brilliant. There was Prism Podcast, which is just brilliant science podcasting. The Parapod, which has a very, very good dynamic. It's very funny. Skeptics with a K, who are always so popular. And it's hard to choose. The judges felt that European Skeptics Podcast was really fresh, and it has an agenda trying to unite people across Europe, and they work so hard getting different people every week. So they were a deserving winner.
Oh, absolutely. I enjoy their podcast very well. I remember when it started, and they bring such warmth to podcasting and their different points of view from their different cultures. I think it's a wonderful thing. Now let's get on to the fun one. I guess you'd have to say the fun one, the Rusty Razor we were talking about before. And it says here that the winner won by a landslide, and I'll leave it to you to tell us who won that award.
Well, I think it was a deserving win. I think an awful lot of people were rooting for this company to win, and they certainly voted for this company. The most audacious pseudoscience, to be able to spread this much pseudoscience throughout the whole world really is quite an achievement. It was Goop.
It's a great name, isn't it? It sums it up perfectly, Goop.
Well, it's fantastic. And also, I think I'd never thought in my lifetime that I would be able to buy psychic vampire repellent. I always thought that if I was attracting that many unpleasant people, basically, I'd be better off going to a therapist or taking a good hard look at my own personal dynamics. I didn't think a perfume would do it, but you can buy one from Goop. There's the idea of steaming your vagina, which, as far as I know, isn't good for it. I mean, that's the kind of thing you do to food, or I mean, hopefully don't get third-degree burns in the process. It's just so crackpot, and it's also kind of... I don't know why our voters specifically voted for this. They must all have their different angles on it. But for me, I kind of wonder, I worry about the level of neuroticism that this demonstrates, that we can live in a society where there's no more cholera, there's no more Black Death, there's no more regularly dying in childbirth, there's no more tuberculosis to speak of. We live astonishingly privileged lives, and you would think that perhaps we would take a chance to look and think, okay, what else can we improve, instead of to just be even more high maintenance about the problems that we don't have.
Yes, I think it's what would probably have to classically call a first world problem. Or inventing problems that we don't really need to have, and selling us things to solve the problems that we didn't quite really have in the first place. It's a deserving winner, absolutely an international winner. I noticed the Goop. It's slightly different from the bent spoon in Australia. We try to keep it Australia-centric, but hey, the more awards like this around the world, the better I think it is for everybody. Well, Deborah, thank you so much for telling our audience about QED and the winners and the sort of loser of this year's Ockham Awards. I love the Rusty Razor, but I do like the True Awards, which is a lovely sort of gift you give to the winners.
It's etched acrylic, and it's underlit with an LED, so you can. It's on a solid wooden base, so it looks kind of it's a lighting effect.
Yes, I think it's very attractive, and certainly something people would be proud to put on display. Deborah Hyde from the Skeptic magazine, which is skeptic.org.uk, all the way from London. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
G'day, this is Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, proud to be a skeptic, and you can find out more about me at drkarl.com and get lots of free stuff there as well.
A piece of his mind. Professor Paul Willis.
I've attended the last half dozen Prime Minister's Science Prizes in Canberra, but not this year. I stayed at home and followed the action on social media. And as the various feeds of the glittering event flashed across my small screen, I became increasingly depressed. My Twitter and Facebook feeds were also laced with yet more reports from Australian researchers getting out of research because they can see no future. There were also laments from colleagues who were reviewing grant applications and their despair that so many good researchers cannot find a basic income appropriate to their skills, talents and experience. Research in Australia is in chaos and deeply troubled. There is a dire need for a coordinated, comprehensive and supportive national science policy. What we get instead is a bunch of tawdry baubles covering just a lucky few. Awarded annually, the Prime Minister's Science Prizes are a collection of 7 awards covering science and science teaching. Straight away here, we have the picking winners problem, seen in other science prizes such as the Nobels. There are many areas of scientific research which deserve our attention and accolades, but only a few that are brought before the Australian public via the PM's annual Science Bash. The 2006 Prime Minister's Science Prize winner was Professor Rick Shine from the University of Sydney. He started his acceptance speech at the glitzy dinner at Parliament House by saying that the best way to celebrate Australian science is to fund it properly. That observation digs deep into the problems of the Prime Minister's Science Prizes. They give the appearance this is a pro-science government for one day of the year. But their actions for the other 364.25 days contradict this image. Most of that time is spent cutting funding and support to research or ignoring scientific advice altogether. At the heart of the problems rampant in Australian research is the federal government's lack of genuine commitment to the national research endeavour. There is no meaningful science policy, and there is extremely poor representation of science across all federal MPs. The feds just don't seem to understand what science and research are and what they have to offer to our society. The federal government's lack of respect for science is no better illustrated than in the revolving door of science ministers that we've had over the last 5 years. I've actually lost count of how many have been appointed, some for as little as a couple of months. This seemingly unwanted portfolio is passed around like a turd in a brown paper bag. No ownership of the science portfolio means no science policy. The closest that the federal government has come to announcing a science policy is their innovation agenda. There is a lot of criticism in the way that agenda is being run. In a nutshell, the federal government has a rather idiosyncratic definition of what innovation is, and all research activities are viewed through that misaligned prism. It is only the applied sciences that could generate an economic return that get any attention. Science has many more important stories to share with Australians than simply how to make a new widget to make some corporation a few more dollars and grow the economy. What are the problems that need to be addressed by a national science policy? From what I've seen, such a policy would address the underspend on research, the lack of career structures for researchers, and look towards clearing out other roadblocks to the conduct of research in this country. Our national spend on research is well below the OECD average, but there is a qualifier here. In Australia, 80% of the funding for research comes from government, and 20% comes from industry and the private sector. In many cases overseas, those numbers are reversed, with industry and business carrying the can for conducting research. Tax breaks in support of research could be reinvestigated to see if business and industry can be encouraged to do more. Perhaps there are other mechanisms at the government's disposal to encourage business and industry to carry their share of the national research effort. Yes, there is an option of simply pumping more money into research, but there's also a problem in the way that funding is distributed. The main mechanisms for distributing research funding in Australia are the Australian Research Council, or ARC, and the National Health and Medical Research Council, or NHMRC. They have a success rate of just under 20%. That is, less than 1 in 5 applications for funding end up receiving it. Thus, 80% of grant applications are a waste of time. Applicants will not receive any funding towards their research. For the lucky 20%, many will not receive all of the funding they request. The assumption on the behalf of the ARC and the NHMRC is that the researchers can find the missing funds elsewhere. All too often, that is not the case. The limited funding is handed back and the research project does not go ahead. A national science policy would encourage the creation of job structures and career paths for researchers. Over the last couple of decades, there has been a move away from permanent employment for researchers to rolling contracts. Earlier this week, I had a disturbing message from a long-term friend. They'd just been given their 4th 5-year contract by their university. People cannot create a meaningful financial life with such uncertainty around their employment. With such an unstable employment environment, it's no wonder that students do not look to STEM, that is science, technology, engineering and maths subjects, as a career choice. If you have the smarts to complete a STEM course at university, you're probably capable of completing a degree in law, economics or medicine with a much clearer and well-remunerated career path after you graduate. If the federal government is serious about supporting STEM education, they could do no better than to create well-structured STEM careers for graduates. I remember sitting next to a bigwig of a large international pharmaceutical company at a business lunch. I asked him how much research his company conducted in Australia, and he responded not as much as he would like. I asked what would be the one thing he would change in order to encourage his company to conduct more research here. And his response surprised me. He would do something to streamline the otherwise onerous responsibilities from ethics committees. All too often, particularly when dealing with human research, researchers have to deal with 3, 4, sometimes more ethics committees. These can be at the federal, state, local and institutional level, and they're not necessarily in sync with each other. Often these ethics committees are stacked with ethicists from backgrounds other than science research, so they have little appreciation of the science behind the research that they are assessing. And this all adds up to a lot of researchers' time spent dealing with paperwork for different ethics committees just to be able to meet their requirements. While ethical oversight of research is important, a national science policy could streamline the ethics processes and make it much easier for researchers to comply with. Not only would this free up researchers' time to get on with their day job, it would also encourage the private sector to invest more in research in Australia. The federal government must embrace science and research. They must broaden their understanding of what science and research are and what they offer for the betterment of our society. They must accept the findings of science into policy debates and demonstrate their commitment to the national research endeavour by appointing a Minister for Science who is committed to the job. Above all, they must produce a comprehensive science and research policy. Instead of this passionate embrace for science and research, what we get from the feds are the Prime Minister's science prizes. Recognition of a few scientists among a community that numbers in the tens of thousands is meaningless. I mean no disrespect to the winners of this year's Prime Minister's Science Prizes, or any other from the past for that matter. I extend my hearty congratulations to Professor Jenny Graves, this year's winner of the Major Gong. I've watched her work in genetics develop over the last couple of decades, and she is a truly worthy recipient of this prize. Congratulations also to all the other winners: Eric Reynolds, Jion Yang, Dae-Yong Jin, Neil Branson and Brett McKay. Yes, it is important that we celebrate the best of Australian science. This should be a complement to, and not a substitute for, a comprehensive, cohesive and supportive national science policy. Wouldn't some recognition of the breadth of genius and hard work from our researchers be a fine thing? Isn't it time that we as a nation supported all our scientists instead of showcasing just a lucky few? Richard's asked me to say a few words about what I'm up to now. As you may know, I used to be a reporter on Catalyst, and I spent the last 6 years as Director of the Royal Institution of Australia. Well, now I've set up my own company, Media Engagement Services, which specialises in teaching researchers how they can tell their message to the world. If this sounds of any interest to you, check out our website, mediaengagementservices.com.au.
On Maynard.com.au. AU! We are doing a live Bunga Bunga at the Harold Park Hotel.
Oh my God, I know. Bunga Bunga live. If you want to be part of us recording an entire episode of Bunga Bunga where you'll be invited to make your own comments, you'll be invited to ask us questions.
The crank mail section, we're throwing it over to you. We're going to be doing it live in front of people. There'll be special guests.
We've decided to go live. Definitely worth putting in your diary. It's going to be at the Harold Park Hotel. Upstairs in Sydney. And if you think getting upstairs is a problem for you, wait till you see how they winch me in from the helicopter.
Yes, that's right. It's the Festival of Dumb Ideas at the Harold Park Hotel, the 14th of November, really soon. Get tickets now. Tickets are available at trybooking.com, or all the information you need is on the front page of maynard.com.au. See you there. Bring your crank mail. Bring your mum. If you do like it, we're going to do it about once a month, aren't we, Tim?
Yeah, if people come along, we want to do one live Bunga Bunga a month. So you get the comedy, you get the music, you get the fun, you get the insights, you get the opinions, you get the politics, and you get the pants.
All the information at maynard.com.au, and it's all there for you. Or go to the Bunga Bunga Facebook page, and it's all happening on maynard.com.au. AU!
Hello, Skeptic Zone listeners. This is Susan Gerbic from the Guerrilla Skepticism and Wikipedia Project. Today, I'm speaking from Sofia, Bulgaria, where I am still on my tour, the About Time tour. I'm about to go to the airport to travel to Madrid, Spain, and then after that, I'll be going home. But I had a couple minutes to catch up with one of my About Time tour members.
Okay, so I guess that's me, one of the About Time tour group members. My name is Liubomir. I do things related to what Susan does, tangentially. I organize popular science events with a variety of basically different formats. We do monthly events, which are about 50 to 200 people, which are either with one speaker or with a panel of speakers for a discussion. We also do bigger events 2 times per year, which are basically conferences. There are whole day events. There are roughly 3 to 4 main speakers with a discussion panel, Q&A, a variety of other activities in like large breaks, etc. So it's roughly about 7 hours an event. What we actually did with Susan yesterday was a small event in one of our common places that we do them. It's a Skeptics in the Pub type of thing. It's in one of the bars in Sofia. It had about 50 people, 60 people, roughly. It was a smallish event. It's likely one of the things you don't know how it will work out until you do it, but everyone was really, really impressed by Susan's talk, which was really cool to see. I mean, we get a lot of different speakers. We get speakers that are, for example, scientists that try to communicate something specific from their field. We get just skeptics, etc. So it's like a mishmash of good or horrible presentation skills. And Susan was totally killing it yesterday. So, why do we do these events? Well, Our main goal is to popularize science. I mean, yeah, obviously we're doing also skeptic events, but our main thing is science. We think that with science communication, you basically make society better in a way. I'm not saying I'm doing it because of it, I'm doing it because I like it. But at the end of the day, that's something that we think is happening because of what we do. The way we try to communicate science is in a more approachable way, basically without dumbing down the content that much, but have it be engaging. It can be complicated. It can be sometimes some of the speakers can be tough to follow. But the key thing is people should be interested and try to figure out what's happening. The best way we've found out that this work is to have people acknowledge that the event is basically entertainment rather than education. I mean, it's like a different mindset type of thing. When people are prepared to go after work, for example, for like a drink and a talk, etc., it's a different thing than going to, say, I don't know, like a university hall or some specialized event space, etc. It's way more free. It's way more sexier, basically. And that's our whole thing. I mean, we try to pick our speakers, to pick the subjects that we do with a certain amount of flair, with a certain amount of showmanship. Even though, I mean, that's not what science specifically is about, but that's how you reach people with science. That's how you make them listen, you make them interested, and then maybe they'll go and figure something else out. Maybe they'll go watch YouTube videos, read books, etc. I don't know. But the thing is, you have to get them hooked first, and that's the only way I've actually seen work. So that was about it for me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Now, I said at the beginning of the show that if you wanted to ask a question of one of the skeptics, the speakers, maybe someone from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, maybe Dr. Raichi, maybe Britt Hermes, if you use the Voice Bite app, and there's links at skepticzone.tv, you can record a little message or a little question for one of the speakers, tag your Voice Bite with the tag #SkepticZone. And that way I'll get your recording and I can incorporate those into the show when it comes time for me to interview, well, whoever I can interview at the convention. Over the past 4 or 5 weeks, we've been playing questions from listeners, which has been really great. So here's your chance too. The app is free, and it's a nice way to be interactive with the Skeptic Zone. And coming up on next week's show, I'll start a series of interviews from SciCon in Las Vegas. I'll see who I can interview. It'll be a bit tricky, but I normally do it, putting together a podcast on the run at conventions, so to speak. But I'll certainly be bringing you something. We also have more reports from Eran Segev, and, well, whatever else will be a surprise. Now, if you're coming to the Australian Skeptics Convention, Skepticon, this year hosted by Think Inc. in Sydney, later in November, there is a live recording of the Skeptic Zone podcast with some of your favourite reporters on the panel. Myself, my sometimes co-host Stefan Soika, Maynard will be running around like normal, Eran Segev, Heidi Robertson and Mandy Lee Noble. Really looking forward to doing a live show in front of a live audience. But until next week, where I'll be bringing you the podcast from Las Vegas, this is Richard Saunders signing off from the Bay Area, San Francisco. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. You can be part of the show by downloading the Voice Bite app at voicebite.com and using the hashtag SkepticZone. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.